Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Family Matters for the first one for 2022. It's really good to have you all here. Tonight we've got a really neat, interesting topic. It's called In-Laws and Outlaws, and we're talking to John and Leslie Quill about that, and they come all the way from Queensland at the moment. So welcome to you two tonight.
Thank you very much. Very pleased to be with you.
Yeah. John and Leslie have been married for 55 years. And they've got a wealth of experience in marriage and relationships. They married families with vastly different worldviews, and they've worked hard to maintain relationships with their extended families while living out their faith in very practical ways. And as a marriage celebrant, John and Leslie have mentored numerous young people and couples in areas of relationships. And we'll hear a little bit about all of that tonight. Right, I've got two Bible readings I'd like to do for you. Just one verse each. Deuteronomy 5 verse 16. You probably recognize this and know it off by heart, but it goes like this. Honor your father and your mother, as the Lord your God has commanded you, so that you may live long and that it may go well with you in the land the Lord your God is giving you. So that was Deuteronomy 5 verse 16, and 1 Timothy 5 verse 8 says this. If anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially his immediate family, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So, tonight's topic, in-laws and outlaws. So, let's just go right back to the beginning, John and Leslie, and tell us how you met and what attracted you to each other.
You want to start? I'll start, all right. I first became aware of Leslie when she attended the meeting at Sutherland Ecclesia in the southern suburbs of Sydney. She was staying with her aunt and uncle. Leslie's mum had died some years before, and this felt possibly that a bit of a break from home might be a good idea. I was going out with someone else at the time, and it was just, you know, oh, this is Leslie. She was bright, she was bubbly, very nice person. It was, I shouldn't tell this story, should I? A group of us were away together, as very well chaperoned, I might add. And Leslie had to go back to Sydney. We're down on the south coast of New South Wales. Leslie had to go back to Sydney. We drove her into the railway station at Bomaderry. And back in those days, we're talking about the mid-60s, it was a steam train, of course. And Leslie sitting there in the old red carriage, one of the old red carriages with the window open. And we were all playing silly things by kissing Leslie goodbye. And I kissed her goodbye and thought, oh, I went back again and kissed her goodbye again and thought, but it was no more than that. And the girl I was going with, I don't think noticed. I'm sure she didn't notice. She had a mind on other things. Not long after that, the particular girl I was going with said, well, I think we've had enough, goodbye. And for 5 or 6 weeks, I was pretty upset. And suddenly I thought, oh, Leslie. And I rang and said, can I come over and visit you? I've never had a yes come so quickly. And so I went and visited Leslie, and things went on from there. What attracted me to Leslie was, apart from initially the bright and the bubbly nature that she had, was that she was committed to the truth. She would think about the things of the truth. Back in those days, you sort of, you know, did what you were told without questioning. But Leslie would always want to know why. Why are we doing this? And sometimes she'd agree with what she was being told to do, and sometimes she wouldn't. There wasn't much discussion back in those days about behaviour, unfortunately. And those sorts of things I found attractive. We also had a lot of other interests beside the truth. We're both been interested in music and Gilbert and Sullivan. We discovered that my school had the same producer and director of our Gilbert and Sullivan, annual Gilbert and Sullivan, as Leslie's school did, although we never knew that. And yeah, that silly little points of contact, I suppose, but it was good. We went to the meetings together and we enjoyed ourselves. We went to CYC weekends and other Christadelphian activities, and so the relationship grew.
Yep.
I came from outside the truth, but once I was introduced to the truth, I never thought of marrying anyone else but a Christadelphian. I just had to
how old were you, John, when you came into Christadelphia? Were you in your teens or earlier than that?
16, 17. Yeah,
okay.
Somewhere. Yeah. I was baptised when I was 17, or maybe 18.
Right.
I can't remember exactly. I'd have to go and look at the book.
Yes.
I'd met this girl on the bus, not Leslie, coming home from school, and my usual line was, "What religion are you?" If I met a girl, sometimes you got good results, sometimes more often than not you didn't. But this girl that's on the bus, she said, "I'm a saint of Delphi." At least that's what I thought she said. And I ran a mile. I'm a saint of Delphi. What on earth is this? If she said Christadelphian, I might have run a mile as well.
So what was your background?
Anglican.
Anglican, okay.
Yeah, this girl was talking to me about the truth on the bus. I was also going to confirmation classes. I was a bit old, really, to go to confirmation in the Anglican Church. It's around about 12, and I was sort of 15, so 16 maybe. So I was a little bit older than the kids that were there. But my grandmother had been a non-practicing but very staunch Anglican. She was very interested in the High Church of England. And Mum and Dad had been brought up Anglicans, but they were non-practicing Anglicans as well.
So what about you, Leslie? What was your background?
Well, my mother was a Christadelphian. My grandmother was a Christadelphian. I don't know how much further back it goes then, but my father had come into the truth from walking around the domain in Sydney and listening to all the different speakers. And actually, he was probably about the same age as John was, probably in his late teens, and just listening to all the talks. And in the end, he decided that the Christadelphians made the most common sense. And so he became a Christadelphian. So from my point of view, I've got long-standing Christadelphians on one side and someone new blood on my father's side.
Okay, but generally speaking, you were brought up in the Christadelphian faith.
Yes.
And
yes.
when you did meet John, he was already baptized at that point.
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, when I met him, he was with somebody else, so I had never considered him as an option. But I knew that there were things that we would talk about. I knew he liked poetry and literature, and there weren't a lot of Christadelphian blokes around who could actually talk about Shakespeare and wanted to talk about Shakespeare. And I suppose I came from a slightly more liberal family where my mother was a school teacher. I was encouraged to be educated, and I trained as a teacher, and we would have discussions in our family. I'm an only child, but my mother and father and I would talk about stuff, which was, I thought, the normal thing. I only discovered when I met different Christadelphians, more conservative ones, that they didn't sort of talk about Shakespeare in their normal conversation.
Right.
When I met John, I was mighty impressed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, your wedding was one where two different religious worlds collided, really. How did you deal with that? And what was it? What was it like? What was actually happening, and how did you deal with it?
Okay. One of the very best things that ever happened, as far as my mother was concerned, that my science teacher at school, who used to run the, what was it called, the inter-school Christian fellowship that I used to frequent, but I talked to him, and he knew that I was starting to be a bit interested in Christadelphians, and he wrote a letter to my mother suggesting that she forbid me to have anything to do with it. And that incensed her. She thought, well, what's his right? What right has he got to do that? So I thought that was a little bit of a positive start. But my father in particular thought that Christadelphians were a bit weird. He was concerned that it was a cult. He had had dealings with 2 Christadelphian families in his practice. He was a doctor. One he thought was the most wonderful people, lovely, lovely people. And the other family he thought was quite outrageous in terms of their behaviour. And I discovered some years later when I was doing the accounts why he thought that, but we won't go any further into that one. They were outrageous. So he had this sort of a mixed, puzzled, not particularly impressed view of Christadelphia, and was a bit concerned about what on earth I was getting caught up in.
Right. So
the,
was he concerned then when you were going to marry Leslie that about this union and the change in the religious direction you were heading?
You better answer that because you put a lot of work into that. The short answer is no, he wasn't.
I think it was helpful for me because I was the second Christadelphian girlfriend that John had had. And
okay.
I knew his girlfriend quite well, and I knew what she was like, and I was not like her. I was different, and I was determined. I could see from their point of view that they would be concerned. I can understand how I would feel if somebody in my family suddenly decided to, join the enlightened whoop whoops or something. And
yeah.
I really felt that I had a responsibility to be normal, to make the effort to get along with them, to meet them where they were. John has a sister who's just a couple of years younger than me, and I got on really well with her. And then he's got a much younger brother, and he was just like the little brother, and we didn't have much to do with him. But I always got on well with John's sister and John's mother, who was just lovely. She was a real mum, and I just felt really comfortable, and they were very welcoming to me, and I think appreciated the effort that I put into feeling, make being as normal as possible, and not continually harking back to what Christadelphians do and believe, and not that I think his other girlfriend did, but I think they would have felt quite uncomfortable with that.
I think Leslie's underselling herself a little bit there. Leslie she did say she put an enormous amount of effort into establishing warm and positive relationships with my family. And she talked to them. She talked to Mum, she talked to Dad, she talked to my sister. And Leslie naturally is interested in people and what other people think and what other people do. And so she'd engage them in conversations about themselves. The other thing that she was very careful to do was to be consistent in her behaviour, to behave in a way that was right and that was moral and wasn't compromising at all as far as her morality was concerned. But that was fine as far as my parents went. They were moral people anyway, and a touch on the conservative side. So that went well. But nevertheless, I think if Leslie hadn't put that effort in, it wouldn't have worked anything like it did work. She'd cook with mum, stand in the kitchen and talk to mum. By that stage, I know Dad hadn't gone out to, Dad hadn't retired by then at that stage, had you? I don't know, did you talk to Dad about his game fishing and his boats and that sort of thing?
No, not so much, but then we go round there on Sunday afternoon, and John's dad was mostly out on his boat catching fish. So I had the opportunity to be at home with mum and with John's sister. Should we talk about the wedding?
Oh, well, we'll see where.
Yeah, tell us about the wedding, because that's an interesting story too.
Okay.
Because my mother had passed away, and my dad was sort of, well, he just said, you know, I'll pay for it. You sort out what you're going to do. It was mainly my aunt and my cousin who helped me organise the wedding. And we had two distinct groups. We had John's family's people, relatives and friends, who were all expecting alcohol at the wedding and probably expecting to have a fairly jolly time as the night wore on, and relatively conservative Christadelphians who would not be comfortable with alcohol at all. So I felt that John's father and mother were extremely sensitive to us in that we had a non-alcoholic wedding, and then John's mum and dad had a party at their place afterwards with all the alcohol, and we didn't have anything to do with that. And I just really appreciate that they were prepared to do that for us.
Having said
that's quite a sacrifice, really.
Sorry?
Yeah,
that's quite a sacrifice on their part.
Yes.
Yes, having said all of that, I don't think I've been to a non-alcohol wedding in the last 30 years, Christadelphian weddings.
Those were the old days.
Yeah. So, has there been any reluctance or animosity towards your faith from family members on either side? You know, because obviously you've become a Christadelphian, John, and Leslie, you've married a person whose family is not Christadelphians. You know, was there any animosity or any reluctance there? And how have you responded to that over time?
The only thing that ever worried my mother was that I would tell my father that I'd registered as a conscientious objector. And she asked me not to tell him. She said he would be so upset about it that it's probably just not worth it. You may want to tell him, you may feel you should tell him, but what's the cost of telling him? There's going to be all of these unforeseen consequences, and it's better not to. So I didn't. I always suspected that he'd find out, and I thought, well, if he finds out, he finds out, and we'll go on from there. But I respected what Mum asked, and I think that she was right. She didn't agree at all about it, but she certainly never gave me a hard time. She just didn't agree. And there was, but Mum was more like that. You could have a discussion with her and decide that you had different points of view, and she would accept that. Dad, I think, with his medical background, and back in those days, GPs did a lot of surgery, which they don't do now. And I think that people who did surgery, they were far more autocratic than what the average GP is today. If they wanted a particular instrument, you'd better have the right instrument and you'd better have it there. And that's fine. I wouldn't want anything else if I was going to a doctor. But that flowed over a bit into his interpersonal relationships. But no, it was that was about the only real issue, wasn't it?
Mm.
Yeah.
We never tried to actually preach to them because I think we both sensed that it wouldn't work. But what we tried to do was to show our lives as Christadelphians. They were very happy to welcome our friends. They knew some of our friends quite well. They understood that Sunday was a special day for us. They understood that we went to Bible camps and we went to Bible classes and that sort of thing. But we used our actions rather than our words to show who Christadelphians are.
Yep.
It never had any particular, or up until now, obvious results in terms of them being interested in the truth. Mum had some religious views that were similar to ours about going to heaven and so on. My sister has come along to several of our meetings, but it's never really taken for her. She's belonged to the Anglican Church forever, and her daughter is married to an Anglican minister, and the ties back there to the Anglican Church are rather strong. And fine, as far as we're concerned, we've got no problems with that. We would like her to see the truth, but I'd rather be an Anglican than not be anything at all.
So just what would, in your experience, what are the risks, do you think, for anyone who does marry into a family with a different faith? What do you think that you're looking at and some of the things that need to be navigated?
I think you need to be very sensitive to the family of the other faith or no faith. You've got to be aware that they may well think that you're an absolute heathen and that you've got no chance of being accepted by God if you are religious. And if they're not religious, they may well just think, it's just a lot of rubbish, all this religion business, just the opiate of the masses. And you've got to be sensitive to those things. It's far better, we felt, to navigate around possible points of contention than to confront them. We believed quite strongly that God would provide the time if he wanted the time to be there. And that seems to have worked in terms of the quality of relationships. You ask them, you are saying earlier, you get them to talk about themselves. You don't talk about yourself, but then you drop into the conversation. Oh well, we've got a spring camp coming up, or an ecclesial weekend coming up, or whatever it might be. Every now and again, I'd mention, oh well, I'm speaking. We call it church for them. I'm speaking at church next Sunday. My sister almost invariably would say, "What are you talking about?" Or my niece, her daughter, would say, "What are you talking about?" It's probably with the niece that that we had more disagreements with her Anglican husband, but they were never nasty. Never nasty.
Sorry, carry on, John.
I used to enjoy talking to my niece in particular about religious matters, especially about the atonement. She's very much of the view that Jesus died to placate the wrath of God, and they were always interesting conversations. And I can remember she shocked me one day. She used to be very involved in beach mission. Do you have beach mission did you have beach mission in New Zealand? Okay,
Not that I've heard of.
no, the
They don't
Anglican,
have beaches.
pardon?
They don't have
They
beaches.
don't beaches. Oh, Leslie, please. Very cruel. Don't start that.
Now that's a low blow.
Very low blow.
They
Yeah.
have mountain mission.
Mountain mission.
Yeah.
The Anglican Church, I think it used to be just the Anglicans, would run these outreach things for kids on the beaches. And they do little sort of Sunday schooly sort of activities during the school holidays or on weekends. And she was very much involved in that in Sydney. And I said, oh, what do you tell the kids? And she said, oh, I tell the kids that God is very angry with them. And I said, Alison, no, do you really? And we talked that through, and that was good. She didn't agree with me, but that was good. That was fine. Seeds, if the seeds are there, whether they sprout, who knows? God knows.
I was quite shocked one day when Alison's two eldest girls were in our bath when they were staying with us. And the eldest of the girls said, Auntie Leslie, Jesus is God, isn't he? And I thought, no. So I just said, God is the creator of all things and Jesus is his son. And she was quite comfortable with that. There was no way I could tell a 7-year-old that she was barking up the wrong tree.
And if you had, it possibly would have had some pretty severe consequences with the family. We've had some discussions. I've had some discussions with Alison's husband, and who I might add is the most delightful human being, about the Trinity, and of course that gets zero progress. But that's all right.
He's quite happy to accept that we believe something different. But both of them are great students of the Bible. And of course, they can find verses to back up what they believe. But it's always in talking to them, and they will always talk to us on scriptural matters.
It's also
good to keep the relationships friendly, isn't it?
Oh, it is. It is. One of the more interesting experiences that I've had with Joe, that's the Anglican minister, is that he was telling me about some difficulties they were having with one church in Sydney. And I thought, dearie me, it all sounds so familiar. About people wanting their own way and thinking that this is the way things should be done and not wanting, all sorts of arguments. And I thought, it's human nature, no matter what religious organisation you belong to.
Yeah. Now, the other day when we were talking, John, you described Leslie as a relationship builder. Now, Leslie, just wanting to ask you this one. What's the keys to building relationships? And especially when you're talking about, in-laws and outlaws and that sort of thing. But what would you say are the keys to building a good relationship with people?
I think probably the underlying sense is that you have to be more interested in the other person than in yourself. But as a teacher and as an early childhood teacher, I have trained myself to walk into a group of mothers and children and make them feel welcome and find things for the children to do and talk to the children, bring them in, get them part of the group. And that's a lot to do with my training. But people say, oh, I don't know what to talk to them about. You talk to them about themselves. How are you? What have you done today? What do you think about this? Did you watch the tennis? Get them to talk rather than
talk about themselves.
Yes.
Yep.
I might have mentioned to you a sister who was in our meeting in Sydney, who died. Well, I say too young. She was certainly not that old when she died, and she was a lovely person. And we went to the funeral in the ecclesial hall, and there were all these young people there. the sort of teenage kids there. And I spoke to a number of them and I said, this is quite interesting. You've come to this sister's funeral. Why did you do that? What prompted you to do that? And they said, oh, she was lovely because she talked to us. She was interested in us. And she used to ask them questions. What's happening at school? What's happening at TAFE? What's happening in your work? What's happening at university? And so on. And she just stand there and listen. And she was lovely. In fact, there's a sister in her 90s who's a great friend of ours, and she's a lovely, lovely woman. She lives in Adelaide, and she still does the same sort of thing at the meeting. She talks to the kids, and they talk to her. And when you go to their meeting, it's at Happy Valley out of Adelaide, it's the younger people who come up first of all and say, hello, Auntie Hazel, how are you? And it's wonderful for her, and it's obviously good for them too. So she's interested in them as people.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And I know, so often we probably tend to get into discussions and we talk about ourselves or our ideas or the things we want to get across. And you think about it, and those are probably the things that turn people off. It's what makes you boring. When people do that. But when someone's asked about themselves, they feel like they're cared for, and that you care. Yeah, I think that's awesome. Really builds such relationships.
Yeah, one of the things that helped Leslie and my relationship a lot was that Leslie's father and my father got on very well. Such different people. Somebody who'd studied medicine at Sydney University, and someone who by trade was a boilermaker, a fitter and turner. And there's quite different backgrounds altogether. Where they met was on the intellectual plane. Les's dad was a great reader. And he used to read philosophy. He used to read Christadelphian works. As I mentioned to you the other day, one of his favourite sayings in his old age, because he lived with us for about 8 years, was, son, he's talking about prophecy, son, I think the doctor was right. And he meant John Thomas and Eureka, of course. And he could find things in Eureka where I couldn't even find what volume he was talking about. He just knew all of these things. He was never involved in the politics of ecclesial life. He was a very humble man in many ways, but he and Dad got on so well together. And that was just lovely to see them sitting and talking.
That's good.
So, have you had to make compromises with your extended families? And what were they, if you did?
No, we don't mind. We never regarded them as compromises. It was never either or, this or that. Certainly we did some things that I'm sure there are some Christadelphians at the time probably would have raised their eyebrows at. For example, my sister asked me whether I would be godfather to her oldest child, and her second child, Duncan.
She asked me first.
Yeah, and Leslie was asked to be godmother to Alison, the oldest child of my sisters. Yeah. Now, what are we going to do? Are we going to say, no, look, we don't agree with all of that, and it's a lot of nonsense anyway? We decided to take a different tack. We talked about what was expected of godparents. And as far as we were concerned, we would have done that, whether we were godparents or not, in terms of caring for them if mum and dad were both killed, and we were interested in their religious upbringing. So, yes, all of those sorts of things, we had no problem in saying to my sister, of course we would. We thought, why run the risk of setting up a barrier there? So we didn't do that. And she knew that we were not particularly enamoured of one was in the Presbyterian church, wasn't it? And the other was in the Anglican church. Weren't particularly enamoured by their religious practices, but that was okay. Why set up the barrier? She still talks to us. We're so much looking forward to going down to see her in 5 weeks' time. She married a farmer, and he died a few years ago, and she moved to the Southern Highlands south of Sydney, and we haven't seen her for nearly 2 years now. So we're really looking forward to it, and she's looking forward to seeing us, we think, too. So that's all very nice.
Yeah.
So
did you keep things sort of fairly even keeled in your communications with both sides of the family? You know, you didn't sort of, you know, favour one above another just because you were more comfortable with those religious preferences. It was sort of kept things fairly even in that way, do you think?
I think it was made slightly easy for us because John's father retired from being a doctor and bought a farm. Right. And so he was in the country and we were in the city. So we couldn't get to see them on a regular basis. So right. We didn't have to spend every Sunday afternoon with them. They understood that. But we did make time. We always went to them for Christmas because, I mean, my dad was living with us anyway. So he didn't have anywhere else to go, and he came with us, and we always had Christmas at the farm at John's mum and dad's place, and we just accepted that as part of the relationship that we had.
It wasn't a religious celebration at all. No. It was a family celebration. But if there'd been some sort of religious component to it, I just would have rolled with that. It wouldn't have worried me particularly. I would have hoped that someone might have asked me something, but that never eventuated. The time I was asked about things was at my sister's husband's, when he died. I asked quite a lot of questions, religious questions about that. I had some conversations with him before, and he was brought up a Presbyterian, but he was, I don't like to categorise him as an animist or whatever. He was very closely connected to sort of Gaia, the spirit of the earth and so on. And he didn't talk about it very much, but he just responded to the natural environment in rather a beautiful way. He did some very beautiful things on his property to sustain and build the natural environment. And we had a conversation about how we're dust, and to dust we return, and what that means, and how that can be circumvented through one's religious faith. But no, he wasn't having anything to do with that. But that's all right. That's okay. Yeah. We had the conversation.
The seeds planted, yeah. Yeah. Now, what about spouses of your married children? I mean, we've just in the last year we've had 2 of our children got married, so now we've got a new son-in-law and a new daughter-in-law. What advice can you give us or anyone in our sort of situation about, you know,
as an in-law?
As an in-law, yeah.
Be careful.
Oh, be careful. Okay.
I'm pretty sure we've got an excellent relationship with our daughter-in-law. She's a very independent woman. We feel through observation, she and our son Stuart have a relationship somewhat different to Leslie and mine, but they love each other and they spark off each other in very positive ways, and they work together very well in both the truth, and both of them are teachers, and in their work life as well. So that's all good, and that makes things a lot easier for us. We like to tell both Stuart and Elizabeth that we chose her for Stuart. We came up in Brisbane one time up here in the Australian Christadelphian Committee, as it was then known, had a program for country kids being looked after by people in the city when the country kids came to the city for work or further education. And Stuart was coming up here to Brisbane to go to the Conservatorium of Music. And we came and saw this man and his brother and his wife, and they had this 16-year-old daughter, and she was quite a sparky little thing. And in the end, she was so sparky that I threw the couch cushion at her, and choop, it came back as quick as lightning. And I said to Leslie when we left, she's a bit of all right, isn't she? You got a bit of character to it. And it's been positive like that. She's really close to her mother and father, which is fine, much closer to them than she would be to us. But if she gets worried or concerned about Stuart, she will talk to us. So what do? We don't. Well, there's been no reason really to challenge her. We have once or twice. We wouldn't challenge her about things. We talk to her about things. So it's again reasoned conversation, and so important to have the reasoned conversation. And
we have the benefit of all belonging to the same meeting.
yes,
all of her family belong to Brisbane Ecclesia. So, and we do quite a lot with her parents, ecclesial things, and sometimes we go away on a caravan trip together and we get on quite well with them. We're very comfortable with them. And so every Sunday, well, by and large, unless one of us has a health problem and let's go into the meeting, every Sunday we see them. I would see her mother at sister's class. We see them at Bible class. We actually share driving into Bible class because we all live close together. John's just married their eldest granddaughter to her spouse, and we're just about preparing to marry one of the grandsons. So we feel quite part of the family. And once again, they have included us in the family because we're up here. We're
Southerners.
Yes, and they've been very welcoming to us. We get invited to birthday parties and that sort of thing. And we've had an excellent working relationship with Elizabeth and her brothers and their wives and their children and the extended family. She's a Collins. There are a lot of Collinses up here.
We wouldn't challenge her in terms of what she does, especially with her children, even though we might be quite comfortable. But then, of course, parenting practices are modified over the years, and some things that we might have done, they will do, and that's fine. That's the decision. If we have been sufficiently concerned, we'll talk to them about it, but we'll do it in a very soft and gentle way, and try not to be obviously interfering. I don't believe that grandparents should keep silent. I just don't think that's right at all. I think grandparents, hopefully, have got some wisdom based on experience. They've been around the track perhaps before, but it's not the message they want to give. It's how they deliver the message that's so important. And that I think has been the best thing of all with Elizabeth.
So if you were going to summarise and give us a quick fire list of some of the most important principles for getting on with a family, what would they be?
I'm just getting my list up.
Did you know this question was coming?
No, we might.
This is basically what I would say. This is what I would say to parents in a parent-teacher interview about relationships with their children. And I think it goes for pretty much any other relationship. And the first thing is to model the behaviour that you would like all parties to demonstrate. If you shout at your child, you can't get angry for that child shouting at you. So if you speak in a moderate voice to your child all the time, you can expect that that's what the child will do towards you. So that's so important. With your in-laws, model loving, kindness, and Christ-like characteristics.
And then they learn to do it back to you. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, and the second thing that I would suggest is managing the communication and the meetings, just like you manage the discipline with your children. You know, you sort of think about it beforehand. You just don't just react. So with any other family members, I mean, it might not just be in-laws. It might be your own siblings that you don't get on with particularly well. It's much better if you organise something that's regular, say once a month, a phone call, a meeting, something like that. But I also think that nowadays, with the technology that we've got, I've observed that people love to get a photo or two of, you know, the grandchildren or something. Even at the meeting, people will say, oh, I've got a new photo of so-and-so, you know, my daughter who's married out of the truth and she's got 2 children, but she sends me photos. So little text messages and photos that are positive and keep the links.
Yeah.
I would strongly suggest that you leave past disagreements behind. Don't keep bringing them up. And that, I'm an only child, but I've observed that quite a lot in families. You know, families get together and the brothers and sisters will remind each other of what they had the argument about last time. Not John doesn't do that, of course, but
of course not.
You know.
So Leslie, does that mean you would recommend that any disagreements that haven't been resolved, that they just are left and never talked of again?
I think you would only talk about them again if you felt that you could resolve them. And you get a sense of that. If you've tried to resolve them and it just ends up in another argument, you're better off leaving it and building a more positive relationship, so that maybe down the track, when you've got a much better relationship, you can just slip it in. But better to build the positive relationship before you start working on the negatives.
And I used to work with a fellow on the north coast of New South Wales, and I used to sort of get excited about what was happening in one of my schools and so on. And he'd just say, John, is this the hill you're prepared to die on? And I think it's a good question. And it's the same with disagreements in the family. Is this important enough to cause a rupture, and maybe a complete rupture? Are you prepared to take that risk? Is it that important to you? And if the answer is not at the moment, well, don't do it. Or if it's no, don't do it.
John is one of my best friends, but she's lived most of her life in a small country town where everybody knows what everybody else is doing. And when I'm with her, I just bite my tongue because I want to say, Beth, but just ignore it. Don't take any notice of it. It's not like that. But, you know, that's the way she is. And I love her for all the things that I love about her. And I just keep my irritation in a box with a lid on it.
Yeah.
Because I'd rather have the positive relationship.
Mm.
And you're not going to have any chance at all. Well, maybe you have, but you haven't got a very good chance of having them become interested in the truth if you've got a ruptured relationship. It's just not going to happen. So I've got to look at the bigger picture, and you've got to look to the future. You don't, if it's a real challenge between your religious beliefs, your behaviour, your morality, maybe there are times when the line has to be drawn there, but you have to do it with great care.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. What would you suggest for where a relationship is already strained and there's perhaps tension that really is causing people to move away from each other? What would be your suggestion for reconciling a situation like that?
Apologise and forgive. Apologise again. Apologise again. Forgive and forgive. What is it? 70 times 7. And then find a way of meeting in a neutral place. You know, I'm really sorry that we've had this bad feeling. I still want to be friends with you. Let's have a cup of coffee, not talk about it, just talk about our kids.
One of the things that Leslie keeps saying, and she hasn't said it in the last hour, is you've got to know yourself. You must know what your buttons are that can get pushed. You must be aware that of if you are going into territory that you know is going to be upsetting and distressing and maybe cause a bit of anger, you've got to either avoid the territory or find another way of talking about it that doesn't challenge you in such a way. Know yourself, know your strengths, know your weaknesses. And you can put your fingers in your ears to this one, Leslie. Leslie's really good at that. And she's also very good at telling me my strengths and weaknesses too. Which I'm getting kicked now, you can't see it. And I appreciate it. Very, very good.
I think if we just take Christ as an example and humble ourselves, I watch interpersonal relationships and I see people taking ownership of their position. You know, this is what I think. Well, just let it go. It doesn't matter. I mean, everybody should always just, you know, send a little prayer to God and say, help me in this conversation, and he will. But just don't get so tied up in your own position that you're not prepared to give a little bit and concede that people can have different opinions, and it doesn't have to create a problem for them.
Yeah. Which means in the long run, everyone's a winner.
Well, yes.
But always you've got to keep in mind what the true goal, the true winning post is, and that is winning a person to the truth. And Paul says, you know, be as wise as serpents and be as gentle as doves. Just be very careful about the way in which you go about these things. I used to have a little favourite saying, mostly to myself. It just used to be, John, you're not the Pope, as in you're not infallible. And I think at times we do go into situations behaving as if we're infallible. And that's just so dangerous. We've got to have the humility to realise we just might be wrong.
Yeah.
I think
unlikely, but it's possible.
I think also that, I mean, we really had a sense that we were not going to persuade any of John's family to become Christadelphians. But I always had a sense of wanting to show them that Christadelphians were good, decent people. So even if you're not preaching to convert them, you're showing up Christadelphians as the sort of people that other people would respect and like and feel comfortable with and feel they could go to for help. And I think there's a lot more to personal preaching in the way you live than just the ultimate of winning another soul for Christ. Just presenting Christadelphians in a positive way, I think, is all part of that.
I'll just tell very briefly my Heritage College Perth story. Once upon a time, I used to be Director of Quality Assurance for the New South Wales Education Department. And one of the things that you used to do is you go with a team of people and you'd assess a whole range of things in the school. And when I retired, two Christadelphian schools, the one in Sydney and the one in Perth, asked would I come and do a review. One of the things in the review that you would do is you talk to parents. Now, both those schools have kids from non-Christadelphian backgrounds as students. And I would always make a point of talking to parents of non-Christadelphian background. I said to this particular mother, why did you send your child to this school? And she said, oh, I heard it was a good school. I said, have you got a relation who's a Christadelphian? Oh, no, my mother told me it was a good school. How did your mother find out it was a good school? The man next door is a Christadelphian and he is a good man. Now, that girl was exposed to the truth. Mother was exposed to the truth, the girl's mother, all because the man next door was a good man. You don't know when you're witnessing to the truth. And that we found is so important with the hope, the possibility of, well, we're down to my sister now, aren't we? My sister, who knows? God knows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time tonight.